So the first panelist member is Dr. Lopamudra Pradarshini. She is an experienced developmental, sustainability, and corporate social responsibility professional. Currently, she's working with Aditya Birla Group as a general manager sustainability. And before that, prior to that, she was with Sonalika Tractors, where she was running various CSR projects focusing on all-round development of society. She has extensive experience in collaboration with the European countries as well. Greetings and welcome to you, Dr. Lopa. For the panel, for the sake of the panel, I hope it's okay if I address you as Dr. Lopa.
Yes, please. Thank you, Renika. Thank you so much. Very
My
kind of.
second panelist is Mr. Ganesh Neelam. He is an Executive Director Collectives for Integrated Livelihood Initiatives, Tata Trust. He joined Tata Trust in 2004, handling the flagship initiative called Central India Initiative, focusing on enhancing livelihood, which is one of the key topics for today as well for the tribal communities in Central India. He is presently an executive director of Collectives, an associate organization of the trust, the Lakpati Kisan Small Village Program. He also, Smart Village Program, apologies for that. He also leads the renewable energy theme at the trust. Apart from his role at the trust, he is also a director at the Foundation for Innovation and Social Entrepreneurship. Welcome to you as well, Mr. Ganesh.
Thank you very much, Renika.
Our third panelist is Mr. Pavan Kaushik, Associate Vice President, Communications and Public Relations at DS Group. Before that, he worked with the Federation of India Mineral Industries, New Delhi, and prior to that, he was with Hindustan Zinc. His career spreads across 3 decades in strategic communication, brand building, crisis management, CSR communication, and launching social awareness campaigns. In the year 2018, Mr. Kaushik was recognized as CSR Person of the Year in the CSR Leadership Summit. And since then, he's also been recognized at various forums such as India Today, Z News, and Public Relations. He's also the founder of a very well-known childcare campaign called Khushi, that provides nutrition, health, and education to deprived rural and tribal people. And he's also the founder of a social campaign on economic empowerment of rural tribal women, Sakhi, which of course we would be talking about during the course of our discussions. Welcome to you, Mr. Pavan, as well.
Yeah, thank you, Renika. You can call me Pavan, that's okay. Yeah.
That's great.
Yes.
So our fourth panelist is Mr. Raju Sharma, the Director for Corporate Social Responsibility at Interglobe Aviation Limited. He leads the social initiatives of the company in the areas of children and education, women empowerment, environment, and heritage. An alumnus of Tara Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, he brings in rich experience of over 20 years, where he's been involved with various other institutions, NGOs, government corporates, to implement grassroots level implementation. Welcome to yourself. To you, Raju, as well. So it's okay if I can call everybody by their first names, right?
You can. That's absolutely.
Yeah, very
Yes.
much. Yes. Yes.
So that's great. So without taking much time, I
Yes, Renika.
divided this into 2 areas. So the first is a generic question. But before that, I just kind of set the context in terms of livelihood, where India is today. And then there is a generic question for which I would provide each of the panelists 5 minutes. Before we start, we're just looking at overall journey of the SDGs. So when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, we are all aware that we're in the 5th year of Sustainable Development Goal, which were initially chartered there was a charter for a 15-year plan till 2030. And there are lots of countries who have been propelling their efforts to achieve those targets by 2030. Now, creating livelihood is also a key driver towards economic growth, and that's something resonates very, very well with one of the SDGs. I mean, of course, it spans across all, but one of the SDGs where it kind of resonates really, really well is the SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth for all. India, when we look at India as a country, has 1/6 of the population of the world. And obviously, for the world to achieve its SDGs, it's kind of understood that India has to be supported in achieving its SDGs as well. The country has shown a lot of commitment towards attaining the SDGs by aligning its national agenda, national development plan, with the SDG pledge of leaving no one behind. I mean, we can see there is various programs that the government has started: Make in India, Startup India, Skill India, Digital India, these are all underlying principles of creating employment opportunities for the country's youth. The other side, when we look at it, is also India being the world's youngest country, is where there is a huge surge in the working age population. But what's a telling statement for us is the labor participation in the country has been on a decline recently. And that's something when we look at, I mean, usually there is a correlation. When you have a working age population increasing, you would expect that the participation in labor force would also increase, but that's not the case within the country. And what's another telling statement is the female participation in the labor force has been on a decline as well in the last few years. When we look at women, they contribute to about 48% of the population. And when we look at the working age population of our women, we have only less than a quarter of those women participating in the labor force participation. Whereas when we look at if there was a 10% increase, 10-point increase, the contribution to India's GDP would grow multifolds. It would absolutely be up over, there was some figure which said it would be about over $700 billion by 2025 if we had a 10% increase in the women participation. So these are a key challenges currently, and there are lots of data floating around where we see that there is some kind of alarming facts and figures. So of course, there are lots of contributors why there could be lots of challenges in terms of why why there is lesser participation in the labor force, and why there is a decrease. But most importantly, we need to look at how we can look as a country, we can look at increasing or enhancing the livelihoods within our country, specifically in this age or in this population, which is the younger population, which is already on an increase. And I know today's topic is about livelihood. So what we're going to look at is specifically the experience that the panelists will bring in, given the field they are, and what exactly and how CSR funds are trying to support this sector and accelerate livelihood. This is kind of quite a fiendishly tricky given the challenges that we have, but what I would like is for the panelists to come forward and provide their views on this particular area of where we're saying that half of India's working age population for the first time is not contributing to any economic activity. The labor force is shrinking. The working age population is increasing. There are various reasons. What, in your view or experience, are the current critical components to mobilize livelihood amongst this population? I mean, you've worked in this area for a lot of years. If you could just address and come up with some current challenges that you're experiencing, that you have seen, or anything that you would like to highlight in the area of how we can ensure what are the critical components to mobilize the livelihood amongst this population, it would be really, really great. So I open the floor to Dr. Lopa. And as I said, there are 5 minutes for yourself, and I would just give you a reminder 1 minute before the 5 minutes are supposed to
get over.
Thank you.
Sure. Right, Renika. Thank you so much. Very good afternoon to everyone, and very good afternoon to my co-panelist and the entire team of India CSR Network for giving us this opportunity to speak about our experiences in livelihoods. As we all are aware that the national lockdown has severely affected lives and the livelihoods across rural India. I'll focus mostly on rural India because agriculture and allied sectors are in rural India and employ more than half of the workforce of the country. A majority of India's farmer, that means almost 80% smaller marginal farmers with less than 2 hectares of land. More than 9 million active fishers directly depend on fisheries for their livelihoods. 80% of which are small scale fishers. The sector as a whole employs almost 14 million people. Now, among that, tribal communities are the most vulnerable in terms of food and nutrition security, as seen in national statistics as well. In addition to farm-based activities, the collection and sale of non-timber forest product (NTPCs) like finger millet, like kendu leaves, mahua flowers, by tribal communities in Odisha has been badly affected by this lockdown. With no collection agents coming and the markets are closed. Now, in this regard, what we are saying that, that there are reports that market agents are charging 24, because we work in these kind of areas right now, I can give that figure, that 24% of the interest is what they are charging in advance credit to be paid after harvest of flowers, vegetables, which the farmers are unable to repay. By building resilient, so I suggest that by building resilient rural infrastructure, we can create economic opportunities and well-being where people are and not push them into cities in search of livelihood, which we have seen. People are coming back from cities. Now, if we have to strengthen the rural infrastructure. To turn this disaster into opportunity, India must act swiftly and move towards a holistic rural development model that supports human well-being and sustainable growth. A revival of rural economy can be backed by convergence of schemes and interventions that support resilient livelihood while offering high quality job and benefits to the youngest workforce in the world. So still, Renika, I heard you, but still I believe in the rural bit of a lot of youth are there. And youth are going haywire. So few of the things which we can do is adaptation of technology at various level of agriculture value chain and creation of agri council in line with GST Council. Now, the second thing I would suggest that future agri supply chains need to have an integration of market intelligence when demand estimation. To achieve this, so we can integrate in Internet for Things, IoTs, geospatial mapping, cloud computing must be explored for rural India. Then there is advanced data analytics and new network mapping, because most of to monitor this product flow and identify gaps. This is very much necessary that we have to have an information on risk in the supply chain. Obviously, government is doing a lot of work on custom hiring center, but in places like this, where I belong in a tribal village of Odisha, there is hardly any custom hiring center. So we have to have such custom hiring center in small and marginal farmers. Also, India should prioritize the export of value-added agri-food products. A step in the direction includes promoting India's food processing industry globally. Obviously, this COVID pandemic is likely to have a lasting impact on our global supply chain. For all chemical products, including agrochemical products, India may benefit in the long run by way of leveraging the shift and attracting greater investment and emerge stronger. There is a dire need to accelerate the process of registration of new molecules.
Dr. Lopa, you have a minute, please.
Suggest is comprehensive village development, resilient supply chain are few of the things which I suggest. And I think, Renika, I am running out of time, if you say.
Yes, you literally have like 30
But this is where I wanted to, these are the few points I wanted to focus in terms of what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass the same question to our second panelist, Mr. Ganesh. Over to yourself. Thank you, Dr. Lopa.
Thanks, Renika. So overall, Renika, based on the experiences of the trust, and because it works mostly in the rural and tribal geographies, what we have seen over the years is there are aspirations. There are aspirations within these communities. Again, the youth have more aspirations compared to the elderly and that's why they try to move away from something which is hard in terms of working and try and get into a place like a city with doing labor, which equally is hard, but again, they feel different when they come back to the villages. So our learning has been, if you are understanding the aspirations of the community, and to meet those aspirations, if you are able to create opportunities within the local ecosystem, which is maybe the village, the panchayat, or the block level, and there are ample opportunities if you look at agriculture and the allied livelihood sectors. How do you basically look at the gaps and the challenges in these particular livelihood opportunities and address those gaps, bringing these communities to anchor those responsibilities? Again, based on our experience, we have seen women coming forth, being more proactive, empowered to anchor these programs and take responsibility of their own livelihood as well as the family's livelihood. And we have also seen a trend of wherein not only in the elderly, but the youth are also getting into agriculture, though the percentage is fairly small. But we could see that because the youth is now seeing ki I on a phone is able to capture my information, is able to click a photograph of a plant and then send it to some expert. So those connections, as Dr. Lopa also mentioned with technology, if you are able to create for the youth, then they find it easy to engage in agriculture. And when you are able to clearly show that when you do so much of work in agriculture, there is a return which is coming to you with those connections, then you are able to make them feel yes, there is opportunity, there is business opportunity, and aspirations could be met. So I feel we need to create those opportunities for livelihood within the area itself rather than looking at something outside. Thank you.
Thank you. I would pass my question to our third panelist, Pavan. Would you like to answer as well, please? Your views on what can be done in this area.
Yeah. Hi. I have a very different view altogether on this. When I launched Khushi about 8 years back, the whole purpose of launching Khushi was that what you said exactly, earlier. 1/3 of the malnourished children stay in India of the world, and India also houses the largest number of street children and largest number of child deaths. There, in one of the panel discussions, I had replied that today a malnourished child is something about 5 years old or a 6-year old, and tomorrow, after 10 years or 15 years, he will ask for work, and there will be no work because his health will not allow. He has not gone into education, so he is not literate enough to handle any kind of a work. So where are we heading? The 1/3 population, child population of India, which is going to be adult. Where are we heading up to? This was the question which made the basis of Khushi. Now, when I say this, the point is, see the comparison between the growth in technology and see the comparison of how these children have grown to accept, adopt, and apply that technology. No, agriculture is one of them. No doubt, agriculture employs a lot of people, and most of them are from the same rural areas. But let us see the infrastructure development. When we talk about a large-scale infra development, do we really see youth today applying so much of hard labor, the rural youth or a youth which has not studied, applying so much of hard labor and coming onto the parallel lines of the nation's growth? It's very doubtful. Coming to the female population not participating in the growth structure, I think the education system has failed somewhere. In many schools, you do not have the required subjects because you do not have the required students. Here a bottleneck comes that a girl is required to travel from one village to another for education. Now the parents do not allow that girl to travel because of security reasons, safety reasons, or whatever reasons. So a generation of female is not moving towards higher education because of the facility is not available. Or facility is not available nearby, or safety is an issue. So what we are looking at today is a result of what we have been handling 10 to 15 years earlier. Today we are seeing the outcome of that. It is not just COVID. It is not just any viral infection which comes and takes away about 7-8 months of a country. It is that in the last 10-15 years, we have not made the education, or we have not made that culture where a youth is imbibed in the growth of the technology and so the growth of a nation. So there is a gap. Now, how that gap is being filled up is by a lot of corporates, is that they pick up youth, they organize proper training according to their requirements, and this is how they are coping up with them. So where the scope is more, the youth are being employed irrespective of male or female. Like maybe mining industries there, maybe FMCG is there, maybe other industries are there, infrastructure industries are there. They are providing special trainings to youth and they're employing them. But where we are not able to reach, and which is a large section, they are deprived of all the growth. So my point, what I'm trying to make is that if today we bring into a system where we make the youth savvy to the technology and savvy to growth in the technology, which is going to be next 5 years or 10 years, probably we will see more interest of this youth coming in the industry. You know, the mindset is 15 years back when the technology was not that heavy. Like somebody said, they are very tech savvy to mobiles, etc. When they are so much dependent on technology in terms of mobile or anything like that, today they expect to operate in the same environment. You can't have a person watching on a mobile and then you ask them to dig a road or do some labor work, because the mindset is not there. Yeah.
And I'd request you to kind of close this in the next 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, I'm fine with this. This is what I wanted to say, that I think we need to match the technology growth with the interest of the youth, and this is where the equilibrium lies. Thank you.
Thank you. And now over to yourself, Raju, please. Let's hear your views as
Yeah.
well.
So, good afternoon, everybody. So, I had kind of I heard all the esteemed panel members, and I'll try and restrict my observations to the productive adult age group of 25 to 35 age group, and all predominantly around the rural India. So, I think I would see the challenges in around 5-6 domains. So as somebody has also pointed out here, I think Ganesh pointed out, and also Pavanji kind of pointed it out. We, I think, do not have a great deal of mapping done between aspirations and the skills in the country. What is it that the youth of our country is aspiring to be? That mapping between the aspirations and the skills that we provide, I think that is a critical link that we are missing at this point in time. So there is a market. There is a market for the jobs, but there is not too much of demand for the self-employment. Why don't we focus more on the self-employment part rather than creating opportunities for job? So that, I think, is a critical missing link which I have always experienced. Number two, I think backward and forward linkages. We have a large number of small farmers and marginal farmers today. They have the small producers. How is it linked to the market? That critical link to the market is missing today. That has been my experience of working in the rural space. And thirdly, Renika and the panel members, I don't know how you have experienced, but in my experience, there is a lot of emphasis given today on building institutions. The farmers, producers groups have been worked out. Village level organizations are being built, but are we really making them only an amalgamation of farmers, or are we making them business people, business farmers? Are we giving them the right skills of business management within the farmers producers organization? That is the real challenge. In many of the experiences, I have felt that yes, we have created farmers producers organization. Even the government says that so many FPOs have been created. Even we have created many FPOs. But the challenge is whether that key business skills, business acumen of identifying the profit loss statement, the market understanding, whether that has been done or not. That's another gap area. And the fourth, I agree with my esteemed panel members when they say that the technology part, technology in agriculture. Today, I was also talking to one of our very respected NGO partners, when said that the technology usage in our agriculture is so low. We have small holding farmers to a great extent. Why don't we capacitate them to use low cost technologies? Technology which is not very complicated, technology which gives a good return. There is immense scope and potentiality to do that. Then we also have cases where we have Moving on, we have bumper production at some years and no production in some years. How do we capture those bumper production years? Even today, in many parts of the Northeast and many parts of other India, we have excess crops, but the farmers just don't know what to do with. How do we add value to these produce? That the supply chain part of it is something which can be a very critical part of it. And my last 2 points I want to say is that overall we need to emphasize and make and see how we work on the issues of distress migration. All of us are a migrant to some extent or the other. We have moved from, but we are migrant. We are so-called progressive migrant at that. We do not. We have all the basic needs. But when we talk about the distress migrants, do we have a very concrete policies, and are we working on that? And yes, the last two most important thing, I think we have to have a strong gender sensitivity and gender balance in all our programs. And gender, my panel members, I think is not about only working anti-male. It has to work in tandem together. The male involvement in the program, the male involvement in farmers, in the women farmers benefits program, it is equally critical. So whenever we work on gender empowerment program, our program has to bring in men's involvement into it. And last but not least, I'll rest my case after this, is how do we address the issues of employment for the physically challenged group of people? That's a very critical component in many of our programs. So are we being sensitive to all these needs? So I think livelihood as such is a complicated process. There are various nuances to it. So one is definitely around policy level. Yes, that is true. Another is on the implementation side of it. And another thing is our own awareness of it. We need to be aware that we as donors, we as implementing partners, we don't know. We have to go to the community to understand what is the community dynamic. We have to learn from our NGO partners. So I think these are some of the nuances that I think I would want to address. I rest my case, Renika. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So actually, you very rightly said there are various nuances, and we need to look at overall implementation, and we need to look at various other factors as well. There are challenges, and as each one of you have highlighted, I can see some of the, I'll just pick up a couple of those. Very rightly said, when you're talking about some of the challenges, of course, the youth, the fact that Pavan, you've mentioned about the education side of it, very, very rightly said that the female education, there aren't any specific programs or specific areas which actually talk about it. There is absolutely antiquated facilities as well, or the infrastructure where we can have women participation in education sector across the area. One other factor that you really mentioned, and I kind of picked up on that, was of course 1/3 of the population, 1/3 of the malnourished children and going up. How does it, because obviously that's the forthcoming youth in India. So these are the challenges, and I totally take your point in terms of how education can bridge the gap and what we can do towards it. What Ganesh rightly mentioned as well is youth has aspirations, but in terms of creating opportunities and addressing those as well, which I think Raju also mentioned, because he's mentioned stuff about aspiration versus skills, and there is that gap. There is that there is a gap that needs to be mapped out, so that we kind of know where exactly the youth is, where exactly what are the skill sets available, and what are the skill sets that are required. Of course, agriculture is one area, and I like the fact that Lopa, the way you mentioned about it needs to be a holistic development completely, and it's about making the rural infrastructure resilient. And that is definitely key, given the fact that we have a huge population in the agricultural sector. So of course, that is the more forthcoming area as well. But when we look at the overall development, we definitely need to look at agriculture, and what I get from the panelists is also we need to look at the youth and where are the pockets of development for them, and in terms of skills, in terms of the market linkages. And I like the bit of the distress migration as well, because that was one of the areas which was when back in when COVID, the pandemic hit, which was one of the key areas of discussion where we saw this huge exodus of migrants moving back into their areas. So there are those factors that need to be looked at in terms of providing larger livelihoods and enhancing livelihoods within the economy. I would definitely touch upon with you, Raju, towards your question. You've mentioned about the physically challenged as well. So that's something I would touch upon towards when we are diving into the second area of specific areas within your programs, second phase of this session, where we're going to look at your programs, because what comes out is there isn't one size that fits all when we're looking at these programs. The challenges are huge. And when we're looking at livelihood within the communities that we're trying to create, one thing that just kind of gels out, that just comes out, is that we need to look at more longer term solutions and more sustainable solutions rather than having precipitous interventions. And I know for all of us who are today contributing towards this panel, we've worked with various communities, we've worked with enhancing livelihoods in different areas, and there are different models. I mean, before I open this question, I just talk about one of the programs that we're managing and we're working on, because as a Polo Ties Foundation, we're also working on creating livelihoods for underprivileged women, where we have this campaign, which is called Ek Naam, which is a different model, because we realize that we need to ensure that the livelihood continues even after our intervention is over. So we have these, with the program, the campaign is called Ek Naam, where we identify 8 women across India who provide livelihood, who provided name not to themselves, but to their communities as well, by providing livelihood to other women. So that's the essence, where we have those 8 women, we bring them together once a year, outside, make them travel, so that there is cross learning, and we felicitate their achievements so that they go back and share that achievement within their communities, and that becomes a cascading effect, and it becomes a domino effect for other women to join such initiatives as well. So that's somewhere a model that we've implemented, where it's an ongoing campaign where we would like to involve various women and get onto this, the rural women, to understand the essence of livelihood and to pass this on to others as well. I'm sure each one of yourself have a similar learning or a similar model to share with the participants, also sharing some of the challenges. So without taking much time, this time I'll start with Ganesh yourself. This is to do with your program. I mean, Lakhpati Kisan. It's just in terms of when we're looking at India, we have a workforce of about 44 to 45% of people in the agricultural sector. And 8 out of the current 10 farmers, we say they're small and marginalized, owning about less than 2 hectares of land. So if you could just draw upon your experience and take us through how your Lakhpati Kisan initiative has supported the marginalized farmers, and how it's contributed for the marginalized farmers to take them through and create livelihoods for them and enhance livelihoods in that area. You have 5 minutes again, and I would just give you a reminder, please.
Sure. So this program, the Lakhpati program, basically again came from the communities with whom we have been working for some years now. And just to give a background on how this program actually came into existence, this was something which we were doing intense discussion with the community leaders within the different states that we work. And we are just trying to understand, like we still have our monthly incomes, like we have our salaries which come from our respective companies. We were trying to understand from these women leaders, or what is the monthly salary or monthly income that they are expecting at their end. So something that came up was in the range of 10 to 15,000 that they were expecting. So as I was talking earlier about aspirations, so they were basically saying if we get this monthly income, it would basically help them live a better life, as well as look at education of the children and other respective requirements for them and the family. And we basically then said, now for that income to come along, you need to look at livelihood opportunities. And we purposefully did not go into off-farm livelihood opportunities. We said, let's look what they have as a livelihood opportunity, which is tribal communities do have agriculture, but maybe in fragmented way, but they do have agriculture. And the second or third important livelihood opportunity, second is livestock, which is mostly small ruminants. And third, in some geographies wherein the forest cover is good, you look at the non-timber forest produce, like Dr. Lopa mentioned about it. Now, if all these livelihood prototypes is what we normally call them, have to be taken ahead, you need to look at irrigation. Now, you can't do anything without irrigation. And again, in these geographies, the irrigation is hardly 5 to 6% vis-a-vis the state average or the national average, even if you look at it. So we worked on, along with the community and their institutional structures, to look at cluster of villages, a cluster of families, and then through them, how do we look at their livelihood areas, agriculture, livestock, non-timber forest produce, look at irrigation assets. Now, when we say irrigation assets, they are not for individuals, they are for groups. So that again, you are not trying to give too much for a certain family and less to other families. So how do you also adjust those pieces? And this program for the last 5 years, we are implementing through these community institutions. As also Raju strongly mentioned, we again have community institutions, but we are also now in a journey to make them understand business, profit loss, and all those pieces. So there's a regular engagement that we are doing with these families. We work with more than 100,000 families in the states of Jharkhand, Orissa, Gujarat, and Maharashtra. Tribal, more than 50% tribal population is what we have focused on. And to our surprise, in the last 5 years, all the 100,000 families are part of the program. And we have seen nearly 50% families actually crossing that 1 lakh rupees mark on an annual basis, only through agriculture-based livelihoods. The baseline incomes, which we again did a baseline, was about 35 to 40,000 from agriculture. I'm talking mainly from agriculture and the allied. So we could see that 3 to 4-fold jump within the income, with again they're doing agriculture in a proper manner, irrigation support, livestock as an what you call livelihood layer. In some cases, it is agriculture and non-timber forest produce. It is some cases agriculture and livestock. So combination is basically able to give them that income.
Sure.
And see how it is irreversible.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'll just close.
Yeah, thank you.
So it is irreversible, wherein we are saying this has to be a year-on-year income. So how do you look at those pieces of market, and if there are any risks coming up, how do you address those risks? So you try to support these institutions, strengthen them, and bring to a level wherein they can now start dialoguing with different stakeholders which are important for their growth. So that's broadly the process, and it's been a positive learning process. We do have challenges, again, in all programs we do have, but the learnings have been fairly good in this program.
Thank you. Thank you. I just realized that we're running short of time as well, because we do want to keep Q&A sometimes.
Yes,
I'm going to move back to yourself, Lopa. And there is just one question, and possibly if you could just sum it up in 2 minutes, and apologies for that, as opposed to 5 minutes mentioned. You have been managing Unnath, which is one of the programs, and I know that which is Utkal's Action for Agricultural Transformation. Again, trying to double farmers' income. That's the intent of that program. I see some of the strategic collaborations you've managed to ink recently with that. Could you just take us through that? I mean, how important is strategic alliances and partnerships in this area of enhancing livelihood, specifically in the area of farmers?
Right, Monica, thank you. As you said, rightly said, that we have managed to create certain great strategic partnership and collaboration, because while we were doing it, we had three things in mind: the SDG 1, 2, and 17. And for I have been telling this in various platforms for the last 4-5 years, saying we need multi-stakeholder based projects. So this was focused to have a lot of quite a few strategic partner to it. And when we were talking about livelihood, and where the central government and the state governments are rigorously working towards it, we managed to partner with the BRLF, Bharat Rural Livelihood Foundation, which is an apex body of Ministry of Rural Development, which ultimately had signed a contract, signed a contract with MOU with Government of Odisha, OLM, Odisha Livelihood Mission. So what happens is the tripartite contract, government as well as BRLF. And the very beauty of this project is it's not only strategic partnership, it's also the financial partnership, because going ahead, if everybody doesn't put their share into some development, it cannot be sustainable. So that is where what is the beauty in PPP model. And I'll take you very quickly 2 or 3 things. That was SDG, we focused zero hunger, no poverty, because it's very important in these belts of tribal. And then building community-owned institution strengthening through FPOs, like Raju has mentioned, farmer producer organizations, and then that federalization of those FPOs into farmer producing company, holding hand, giving them the financial literacy, as rightly Ganesh was mentioning. Then we were talking about value chain intervention through cluster approach. That means everybody together would do ragi. Maybe 300, 400 acres of ragi will be produced. Then value addition to this to be happened. Once the value addition has happened, then we have to have a market linkage. With these partnerships, we managed to achieve all these targets. Now, the very important thing going ahead, we decided that we have to create entrepreneurs. So a part of this project is creating agri-entrepreneurs. 50 youth can be, our target to create an entrepreneur. The final thing I would like to say in this place is the farmers has not only called as a farmer, but as Raju said, it's a business farmer. So I generally say farmer entrepreneurs who knows to keep the cost accounting of their field, their crops. That means from the time they are buying the seed, how much they are buying, what is the cost of sowing, and what is the yield. Once the farmer understands it, he or she becomes an entrepreneur. So going ahead, these all are together gives a larger impact and longer impact to the project, which is the beauty of this project, as you rightly said. Also, we are working on incubation centers for youth, which is off farm. We talked about Unnat, this is it, but also off farm also. Utkal is working and Hindalco is working towards it. Thank you, Renika. My 2 minutes is over.
I totally agree with you. Ownership is absolutely critical, and for creating farmers, specifically entrepreneurs and business skills acumen, which Raju mentioned earlier as well, this is one of the gaps, but this is one of the critical areas that needs to be looked at. Over to you, yes. Raju, I just have one question from yourself, coming on from what Lopa was saying. I mean, I do realize that you have a program called Indigo Shakti, which is a women empowerment intervention, and you're working in the area of off-farm and farm activities, initiatives within the area. The one question you've mentioned that there is income generation opportunities for women over here that's provided. The one question that is key over here is, how do you ensure that the income generation activities they continue even after your intervention is over? Because that's somewhere the ball is dropped, where at times you provide income generation initiatives, there is the women take it up, but at some point sometimes it's dropped. So I just want to know from your program, how do you ensure that there is a continuity and longevity?
How much time do I have, Renika? I'll share my answer.
2 to 3 minutes.
Brilliant. That's enough for me. Okay. So Renika, I'm glad you put this question. So the way we look at it at Indigo and in all our programs is that we talk about sustainability even before the program is launched. And it's not about livelihood or Indigo Shakti program. It is in all our programs, whether it is women empowerment or just heritage or environment. So the conceptual understanding is that there has to be a sustainability of the program even after we exit. So why do we do that? We say that we are catalyst in the development space. We don't have all the answers and we are not going there to stay forever, and nobody should be. We are just a catalyst. Having said that, we say that in our women empowerment program, there are crystal clear objectives that is laid. The first objective is that women's income has to increase from X to Y. It is written down in the agreement with all our partners that yes, the money has to go from this to here. And then there are two, three other objectives. The food security has to be ensured and the distress migration has to be reduced and all stuff like that. But how do we ensure when we are out of this? That's the critical. Therefore, from the day one, we lay a huge stress on creating institutions and sustaining it. In nowhere in the world I have seen any program being sustained. What is sustained is the process. Therefore, we think that the process has to be so strengthened that even if you are there or not, Renika, even I am there or not, the things, the women have to stand on their own feet. The community have to look after the process from their own. Therefore, we lay a great emphasis on these farmers producers organizations or the village producers organization or the woman herself, because the moment they start earning, the moment they have tasted the income, they will take up it on their responsibility to either do it for themselves or demand it from the government. That's all.
Thank you so much. I totally agree with you. And I very rightly and very appropriately put in terms of having sustainability as an integral part and as in the key part for taking before starting the program as well. And I'm really glad that we're looking at impact-driven initiatives. So my similar question to yourself, Pawan. Basically, I know that you're the founder for Sakhi, which is a rural empowerment program in Rajasthan, where you have Sakhi centers in Rajasthan. If you could just take us through in terms of what was the thought process of starting Sakhi program that you when you were working with Hindustan Zinc. More importantly, just touching upon on what Raju mentioned, how do you ensure that the model is sustainable? Because obviously you've moved on, but the program's running. So if you could just touch upon what are the elements that you make sure are a part of this program to ensure to have it as a sustainable model for the program. What exactly have you done? What exactly is the contribution has been towards this area? Would be really great if you could just shed some light upon.
Sure. See, what we actually do is we form an SMG. We increase the number of SGs, and we say that about 12 to 15. Can you hear me now? Better?
Connectivity issue. Yes. So yeah, I can.
Yeah. Okay.
So everybody else can hear you as well.
Okay. So I think what I was telling was that we normally form an SHG. We calculate that the number of women in SHG is about 12 to 15. Then we multiply those SHGs and we give a figure that, okay, we are catering to and we are helping or we are bringing social empowerment in about 50-60,000 rural women. Now, I think we are done with the social empowerment. There's too much of social empowerment which is already gone. The time it is to bring economic empowerment. This was the issue, and we were very clear when I was forming the Sakhi project. My thought was very clear that how do I bring these women and how do I in the mainstream, and how do I connect them with the market which is long lasting, like Raju also said, that even me or anybody moves on, the system should run. Now, generally we search, we build those kind of clusters where the market is outside your organization. But if you see closely, you have enough market for these women within the organization. So with this thought, two changes we did. One change was that don't give them training just for the heck of it or just filling your KRA. So forget about that. Give them a training which is product linked, and you should know that this product will be sold in which market. That was the first aspect. Second aspect was identify the needs where these women can very much put in their products within your organization. I'll give you 2-3 examples quickly. So we built a cluster of home furnishing. We built a cluster of spices. We built a cluster of perfumed candles. We built a cluster of fashion garments. Now, when you know that you're teaching these women stitching, I can tell you 90% of the organization are teaching only women clothes to these SHGs. They do not teach them men's clothes. So that was one big bottleneck. What we did was we taught them school uniform stitching. Now, when you have Anganwadi centers, when you've adopted about 3,000 Anganwadi centers in Rajasthan, which belongs to Hindustan Zinc and government of Rajasthan, you're actually bringing and you're actually making uniform for those children. So you have an assured market. Second market was you have got in-house a lot of cafeterias and canteens. So when you build a spice model or spice cluster, those spices are supplied in your own canteens. And when you bring a home furnishing cluster, replace your gift items with these rural women, and then send those gift items to your stakeholders. They would love it more. So similarly, these clusters were designed, and the first market was your in-house market, and second was your stakeholders market. So this is how the Sakhi progressed, and I was very glad within a span of 3.5 months, we were able to build an economic empowerment of more than 5 lakh rupees for just about 2,500 women.
Sure. So I'll have to stop you over here, but that's very well said, because it's out of box thinking. You're not just giving specific, you're not just using similar stuff, which are similar models, but actually looking at some other initiatives. I mean, it's a very interesting fact to have men stitching areas and also forming clusters. And this is totally, absolutely in agreement in terms of looking at market linkages, because that's where most of the programs can go off guard as well, because market linkage is really, really critical. Just being conscious.
Renika, I just want to say here, I think because a lot of people are listening here.
Oh.
See, I was just saying a spice cluster. Now, when you take spices from outside, you always have that doubt of any kind of, some mixing, or it is not pure. Yeah. But when these women make spices, they have no option but to make only original spices. Absolutely. So you get these spices at a lesser rate, better quantity and quality. Yeah.
And no, that's very, very rightly said, and that's the need of the hour as well. When you're looking at procuring stuff, so that's the need of the hour. That's better quality. I'm just a bit conscious of the time. Before I kind of close the session, I just thought maybe it would be useful to see if there are any questions for the panelists. Aprish, how do we go about it? Are you going to look at, and because I can't see it on my screen, if there are any queries for specific panelists, or if there aren't, I have 1 or 2 questions more to go about.
There are questions at Q and A sessions.
Yeah.
At the bottom.
So I can see. I will just, this could be for any of the panelists. So there is a question which is from Sujay, which says, how does the marginal farmer be integrated into corporate ecosystem and responsibilities? Example, Bharti starting a large agri-based company created major problems for integration with smaller farmers' land holding. Is there somebody who would like to take that from the panelists? I can repeat the question. How does the marginal farmer be integrated into the corporate ecosystem and responsibilities?
Let me.
Go ahead, Raju. Is that yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, okay. So if I understood the correct question correctly, it is how does the marginal farmer get integrated with the corporate, right?
Absolutely.
So I think each corporate, all of us sitting here are exactly trying to do that, right? So when we are trying to integrate the small farmer through the farmers producers organization to the market, when we are working on the capacity building training programs, when we are going to and meeting to I'm sure when Pavanji visits the field or Dr. Lopa visits the field, they have a dialogue directly with the farmers, and that's the interface. So interface is not a magic word that happens all of a sudden. It's an organic process that builds. So today, when we are talking about the, about the marginal farmers, when we are talking about linking it with the market, that's the integration that's happening, like, at a knowledge base. But when we are doing it in the field, like for example, in our case, when our partners in the field, they have formed the FPOs and they are linking with the market. That's the integration that's happening. At least I have understood it that way. Pavanji and rest of my panel members, I don't know what you might want to add.
I agree with Raju. Yeah, I agree with Raju because when you're talking about the project Unnat or any of such intervention with FPO, it is specifically for marginal and landless farmers. When it is landless, then we go for livestock and we go with NTFPs. So there is the projects, what we do on ground, actually meant for all of them on various pockets. So I totally agree with Raju that when you go to the field, then, integration happens and various other, somebody else was saying something.
So,
So Renika, I think one also was something important is that the farmer should also be willing to integrate with the corporate.
Right.
We go in the field, we go and talk to them, but there has to be a very pro willingness from the farmer side to integrate with the corporate. I think if that marriage happens, there are a number of programs which are launched by corporates where they can integrate very nicely.
Sure. Anything that you would like to add? Anybody else? Ganesh, do you want to add anything? And otherwise, I think we're on time. I would just like to close this session with just kind of a summation. I can see some more questions, but possibly what I'm going to do is I will request Aparesh from here to just take up these questions and we can send it to this panel later. And if people could put their email addresses, that can be replied back later, if that's all right, please, because I'm conscious of the time and we have the second panel, which I can see 1 or 2 people from there already who joined. So is that okay with you, Aparesh? Would you be, can I send it to yourself, the questions, and then those can be sent to the panelists for answering?
Sure.
Later?
That could be done.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone else have anything else to add? So, or I can possibly just close the session, please?
Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So,
Yeah, Renika.
just a minute. I mean, whatever I picked up from the session, it's of course, all of you have actually contributed heavily into talking about what livelihood means and where exactly are the areas what we can do in terms of enhancing livelihoods within our youth. One thing which I really liked, where I think Pavanji, you mentioned about having youth being savvy to technology. That those are the areas where all of us possibly as corporates could look at. There are areas which were also mentioned in terms of, I think one of you had mentioned about ownership as well. I think it was maybe Lopa, you mentioned about how ownership of the program needs to be there for partnerships, any of the partnerships to be more meaningful and to work further. The mention of market linkages is absolutely critical. It is one of the most pertinent areas, because if you're having skill sets, enhancing skill sets, you need to look at where the market linkage is, where exactly you can possibly accentuate and accelerate the market linkage, the livelihood side as well, because these are the things that we need to look at before we start the program. And overall, when we're looking at enhancing incomes through livelihood, very, very rightly said that sustainability is absolutely a really inherent and a critical feature, because if you've not looked at sustainability, when we as corporates are out of that area, we need to ensure that the learning, that the programs that we have developed in the areas continue, and it's not something that just kind of falls apart. So that's a very, very interesting factor and a really interesting feature that you mentioned, Raju, in terms of going forward, that how the programs, before even it's developed, there is a whole sustainability aspect that's looked at. And overall, when we're looking at our marginal farmers and how we're looking at enhancing their income across is one of the critical areas, yes, but to look at how we ensure that it goes forward on a longer term and as a longevity is absolutely critical and an absolutely great feature to be looking at when we're looking at livelihoods and enhancing livelihoods, because we all know that this is absolutely it's an arduous task, but to enhance livelihood is an arduous task, but to sustain it is even it's even more difficult. On that note, I would really like to thank all of the panelists who have contributed towards this session. I would request the next speaker, Mr. Madan Padaki, who is the founder of Head High, to take charge, please. Thank you to all the panelists from the previous session. What we would be doing is we would be sending you the questions that are in the inbox at the moment that I can see for yourselves to answer, and people who have sent the Q&A, if they could put their email addresses as well, that would be great, so that there can be replies sent to yourself. And over to you, Mr. Madan Padaki. I hope I have pronounced your name correctly. Thank you so much, and thank you India CSR for having this really important topic on livelihood to be discussed in your sessions. Thank you.